Thank you, Professor Green, for this interesting journey through the scales, different scales and aspects of climate change and mitigation. I'm sure there will be questions. Please, yeah. Do you need the microphone?
Good morning. My name is Subhashish and I come from India. Listening to the presentation, two quick reactions. What you told is the issue of marketing climate change. Because you talked about communication, you talked about certain products like renewable energy and also government pricing them. And the second point is, do you see a role of corporate social responsibility acting as a pilot centers for this sort of adaptation and mitigation measures?
What do you mean with corporate? What's your idea behind it?
The corporation's role in promoting sustainable development in terms of innovating new technology and sort of acting as a pioneer for them, particularly in industrial townships like Eindhoven or parts of Germany.
And the idea behind it is that industry or enterprises cooperate with public sector or with citizenship, or what was the idea behind it?
The idea is that if climate change becomes a global issue, probably there is some value for them to adopt this to take a leadership role, because in the long run they can probably gain also financially if they look at this as a social innovation leading to a business proposition.
Yeah, I can mention that climate change, or for example, the questions of quality of life in all these cities that are on the seaside and the coastal cities. One very important point is quality of life in the future, because people get aware of the risks living there. So if these cities take it positive and try to develop solutions that really can show that they are secure, or that they have adapted in a way, then I think they can use it as a sort of very positive image for the city. Whereas cities that give the feeling that it's very risky to live there, they certainly will have problems in the future. So I think that a very offensive way, or very positive way of dealing with this would be that the city government really takes this challenge and not tries to prevent discussing about it, but really it takes it as a challenge and tries to develop solutions. And we can see, for example, in the research in Hamburg, that there are a lot of business partners who are very interested in this. There's on one hand insurances, they are very interested because it's a real problem for them. On the other side, there are just engineering partners, technical partners, water techniques, for example, water engineering enterprises that see a market in this, because it's a huge market. Actually, there are so many cities who are touched by this. So if urban development approaches can be developed that can be transferred, and this discussion about transfer is very strong, then I would underline your decision.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Thank you. My name is Patrick Tornberg. I'm from Joerg Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And thinking about that point, long-term planning, as you referred to. And I think, of course, climate change and this whole challenge or issue is one of the most long-term issues we're dealing with at the time. But there are, of course, others as well. And maybe climate change is one of the fields where this is most important, or something like that. But I'm wondering, has this triggered a discussion in the scientific community about how to create incentives for politicians to make long-term decisions? Planners are often good at making these long-term plans and visions and scenarios and everything, but when it comes down to making a choice and taking a stance, it always comes back to the politicians. And it's really hard to see the real incentives for someone right now to do something which doesn't affect me, but someone else in the long term. So maybe climate change is a field which could promote that kind of discussion about how to create incentives for long-term
absolutely.
Taking a stance for long-term.
Absolutely, your question is I think a very important question, because we always in planning have this question. We have good ideas, or we think there is an important background, but this connection or this linkage to the political decision process. That's always one of our problems or of our challenges, I would say. And climate change again shows this difficult connex here, because the long-term situation is even more difficult, as I have described. For example, scenario workshops are one approach for trying to integrate politicians into the whole discussion, bringing them together with citizens from the city. Citizens are sometimes in those discussions might be more, I will not say objective, but they might be more open for the problem. Politicians might think, that's always difficult to say it black and white, but they might think more in their periods of election, 4 or 5 years. While citizens in those scenario workshops, that was the experience in our model project, but also in a Danish one that worked parallel, they suddenly may build up a pressure against the politicians to say, hey, we really have to deal with this. It's okay, you are in your 4 or 5 years, but we think it's important for our future. Our families, our next generations, for example, at the Danish coastline, they had this discussion, will they build dikes with for high amounts of money, or could they find other solutions that are not so costly and that gives them the possibility to use the money for other things? It was quite a rural area that did not have huge amounts of money. So from the citizenship side, they discussed about new ways of changing land use, pulling down the dikes in the first line, because these were the most expensive ones, and building other solutions in the back. Politicians didn't want to do this, because they had a feeling it's important and they wanted to be prominent for the next years. They wanted to show they have it, they have the solutions, they 100% security, is everything working well. And from my point of view, those approaches can help to bring more long-term rationality into planning. That's one approach, but it's only one. But that's the discussion we really have to lead, as you have described, how to link these planning challenges with the political decision process. And from my point of view, from this background, it's important to link our discussion with political sciences, for example. To look into social sciences more, because they discuss this, have discussed this for also for decades, not coming from urban planning questions, but from other questions. There are a lot of other questions in the cities that are not so strongly urban planning related, that are important for political scientists. And so these cooperations could bring us forward and could try to include new ideas into our planning processes, planning theoretical discussions. But it's really important.
Are there other questions?
I have 2 pictures of the presentation in mind. The one is the one with the flood management plan, and the other one was that with the development in Hamburg, where they take all these houses very, very close to the river. So, on the one hand, you said that, you try to change the image from an enemy to a positive thing, which I completely agree with. But the thing is, what happens